Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I am doing well, and eager to stay busy and correct all the evils in the world.
That's not too
Fat
easy.
chance on that, huh? What I'd like to do today, Daniel, we do it in a way all the time, is why? And we try to explain and get the evidence. But the bigger question is, why? How did it ever happen? Who are the motivators? Who's behind it? Is the deep state involved, or just a bunch of stupid professors that taught everybody in Congress and educated the people at the Federal Reserve? And even in the medical profession, you got the medical profession determined that immunizations are the way of the future, and everybody has to have shots for everything. And that Bill Gates is right. He's rich, but I'm not right now going to say that he's right on this stuff. So there's a lot of questions about the motivation, and I imagine there's not just one motivation, but some of the things that are so strange are so much harm. Why can't we wake up? I use the word masochistic. It's time that our society is masochistic. We do so much to harm ourselves, and we never say, hey, why do we do it? But I've argued that in the case of economics and foreign policy. Wars, we know it's wrong, we keep doing the same thing. Monetary policy, same thing. And they have these crises which were predictable. So it's a strange thing that people keep doing this over and over again, and the crisis keeps getting worse. It's almost like something is going to change if we just keep doing the same thing. But the one theory I have, and I've mentioned it before, is that we have two big problems. We have the Federal Reserve spending and that mess, the monetary system, and the financial bubble. And Austrian economists have been talking about the huge size of the financial bubble, and it would burst, and it was bursting. All the signs were there that it was leaking out, and that we would have a calamity as a result of the Federal Reserve policy. But we don't hear a whole lot about that. I still think that's on top of the list, in spite of the great danger and the harm and the number of people that have died already from the coronavirus. But I haven't been convinced that the policies and just this plan to have rush through the vaccines and force everybody to have it. I don't have much confidence in that. But everything is turned to coronavirus and the lockdown. So we're thinking mostly about the craziness of the lockdown. And now, though, even though we didn't like it when it started, it looks like there may be some people joining us and saying, we're not tired of this. So the numbers are coming our way on this because there's some evidence now that those who, for one reason or another, like this policy, are starting to realize, well, maybe the natural course of events on infections have just moved along, and that this virus will be soon forgotten, instead of saying, well, it's here forever, and that's why the American people and the world has to adapt to this and realize that we can't ever go back to what we consider a normal life. Well, I can think of some things that we can do to actually improve where we were. But I think there's preparation, psychological preparation for people who believe in this stuff. And they believe in government authority. I used to just agitate over why would they take us to war deliberately, because it's so horrible. But then you read about it, and we've been doing that for a long time, especially since World War II, that we deliberately, set the stage for going to war, and in spite of its evilness. So the motivations, I think, are mixed in this case. Ignorance and political power and money and theories on vaccinations. All this has come together to create this madness, the madness of crowds, if there ever was one. And people, though, now I think they're starting to stir, and they're starting to say, hey, why don't we think about this now? And that so often is the case with government overreach, is they overreach, and then the people get left behind, and then the people finally have to speak out. And I think that's what we're seeing evidence of now.
We are seeing more and more evidence of that. And I'd like to just start with a hat tip to AntiWar.com. There was a new Hill-Harris poll that was done earlier this month very interesting. 74% of Americans are concerned about losing their freedoms over this hysteria, the coronavirus hysteria. So that's a good sign too. But I think when we start thinking about what's behind this, I think it's always good, even though it's relatively recent history, to look back and say, how did we get to where we are right now from where we were a month ago? And it's really interesting because there was something that actually we can put up our first slide, because this says a lot, Dr. Paul. This is on in March 16th, New York Times. White House takes a new line after dire report on death toll. Remember, early on, President Trump said, oh, this doesn't look like such a big deal. The UK government said we need to get herd immunity. That was their line. All of a sudden, they did a sharp about face. And look at the next one. This is from the same article. And this is what they showed. This is what caused the governments of the US and UK to panic. 2.2 million Americans would die, and 500,000 citizens of Great Britain would die. This was what caused the panic. Well, where did this report come from? Well, it was a paper done by a British epidemiologist called Neil Ferguson. We've talked about him before. It was interesting because this paper was not peer-reviewed. And actually, the former chief epidemiologist for Sweden, which as we know has taken a different path, he said this is not normal scientific practice. He just threw this paper out here and wasn't reviewed by others. But the about face that they did, based on what Ferguson said, was remarkable, and that's why we're in the shutdown right now. But the thing about Ferguson that's interesting, and there was a great article on LouRockwell.com today, which out and out called him a charlatan. And if you say that's a little strong, he's just a scientist, no, his history in the past is very, very shady. Here's something from the article that's interesting to read, a couple of things. It was Ferguson who in 2001 convinced Prime Minister Tony Blair to kill 6 million cattle to stop the foot and mouth disease. It cost £10 billion and is now considered an absolute absurd thing. In 2002, he warned that the mad cow disease would kill 50,000 British people and then another 150,000 when it transmitted to sheep. That's 200,000 people. How many died? 177. In 2005, he predicted that the bird flu would kill 65,000 Britons. How many died? 457. So this guy's credibility is totally shot. But Fauci and his group picked up on this, grabbed it, and ran with it, and that's why we're in complete lockdown now. So you got to answer, as we try to ask in the headline, what is behind this?
If you compare this to the spread of the virus, the literal virus, which raises a lot of questions, this is a sort of ideological virus. They throw it out there. It's not true. Nobody knows for sure, or maybe bits and pieces of truth. And then there's this reaction. But it's the information and the credibility, as you mentioned, our government even gets involved. And then what happens? There's a panic. There's the panic, which probably is not illogical. It's just that they're operating too quickly on bad information, and then it goes from there. When the panic occurs, I think of people panicking under economic or political situations as something like what happens if you're trying to rescue a drowning person. They can't swim. They're in there. They're thrashing. If you ever did lifeguarding, they teach you a few tricks that you have to do to watch, because that is a tough job. And I think that's what happens to our society. But I think the astounding thing to me, if we were even, partially on the right track on this, it should have been more narrow. This happens all the time, a panic here and there, and then people wise up. But this was universal and worldwide. It might be the fact that there's communications now that are much more rapid, and governments are bigger, and there's more money thrown at it, and there are more special interests. But I think they have panicked. And this is what we're seeing. Everything, throw this at this, do this. And when I see the money being spent, if that isn't a panic that money is going to solve all these problems, and everything they do economically is wrong. Because if they were dealing with just the economic problems, it wouldn't be that you do the same thing. You wouldn't spend more money, rent up more debts, print more money, have more regulation. That wouldn't be the solution. So now, if let's assume a lot of people are suffering that don't deserve it, but let's say you have 100 businesses and maybe, let's say, just for instance, what if 50 of them were pretty good and they saved their money and they protected it and they could work it out? Everybody overbuilt. There were too much stuff out there, and the weak companies were destined to fail.
Yeah.
But what do? The bailout has to be for everybody, and you can't discriminate against everybody. The only people you discriminate against are the people who've been successful, and they had some money in the bank, so they go and they do this, and then you have all these regulations that have to be reintroduced. But it's a system that encourages policy, and I think that is what's going on, and that's part of this panic that goes on. Then when you add up the panic with the virus, then you're dealing with the reaction is the destructions of civil liberties. That may be the biggest issue. The destruction of economic wealth. If you get your liberty back, you can recover real fast. But if you don't get your liberty back, no matter how much money you print and how many regulations you write and rewrite, it won't work. And this is what is going on right now. People even are trying to go back to work, but if they go to a restaurant that's just struggling, I think we can open up, they don't take the jobs.
Yeah.
They don't have jobs. I said, well, welfare pays more than you're going to pay me for minimum wage. You know, so they use that. There's no incentive to come back together and become economical again. They just have to say no. We have to bail out people, and that's why we have this utter chaos. I mean, it's really madness, and the odds of all of a sudden people backing off. They have the political situation such that, boy, just try to back off now and vote against one of those things.
Yeah.
Look at what Massey went through, Thomas Massey went through. One person say, hey, do you guys know what you're doing?
Yeah.
This is insanity. You think if $10 trillion hasn't helped, $20 trillion is the answer. Well, I don't. I think that's when, yesterday or, on the weekend, oil went down to negative $40. You had to pay $40 for somebody to take your oil. I mean, if you don't think we're working in an insane world, but that all came about before the virus. That's when they decided that you had to pay somebody to let you loan them their money at negative interest rates. It makes no logical sense, and it introduces this madness and distortion and malinvestment and unbelievable debt. So there's a lot of messes to contribute. And I think the most important thing that we can do as a country is encourage the fact that people ought to make their own decisions, whether it's on the viruses or anything else, that people ought to make the decisions, and they ought to have their liberty back. And if they want to go to church and take a risk and be in church with somebody that might have a cold virus or whatever, they ought to be allowed. There's some protection that was assumed by the Constitution that we should have.
Yeah, exactly. And you captured some of this in your column this week, because you talked a little bit kind of about Bastiat's idea instead of what, because we spent how many trillions of dollars now shutting everyone up, whether you're old or young, sick or healthy, everyone is shut down. And you make the point, there is a virus out there, but why wouldn't you target that resources to protect the most vulnerable in society, so that the rest of the society, if they choose to, can go on with their lives? You'd save a lot of money, and you'd actually protect some people. You may even have a lower death rate, certainly when you add up all the suicides and all the other related things from the shutdown. But we've been talking on the show, Dr. Paul, from the beginning about the fact that they don't have the science yet. They don't have the denominator. You know how many people died, but you don't know how many people have the disease. Was case to fatality ratio or something that they haven't had. Well, the numbers are coming in, and the numbers, once again, the Faucis, the Fergusons of the world are shown to be massively wrong. And here's actually, a few of them have come in over the weekend, and it's fascinating. If you look at the first one, a study in the Netherlands, hundreds of thousands may have the virus. Fatality rate could be astronomically lower. That's only one of many studies. We can look at the next one. Stanford University did a study in Santa Clara County suggesting that over 80 times, 50 to 85 times as many people may have the virus and be asymptomatic as they thought. So they're actually now admitting that it is probably less deadly than the regular flu virus. There's one in Chelsea, Massachusetts. New York City hospitals did tests on pregnant women. 15% tested positive, much higher than they thought in society. Most of those showed no symptoms. 19 out of 23, I think, showed no symptoms. In Los Angeles County, they tested 320,000, or they found that 320,000 adults have been infected, 55 times larger of infection rate than people thought. Tons of people have it. A very, very small number are dying. But that wouldn't sell. So what they have to sell is, if you get it, you die. And that's been very effective.
And it is this panic and this hysteria that goes on that prompts this. They prompt making the so-called mistakes and misleading information. And then the correction is, well, we need more information. We have to know, let's say there's 20 million people out there that are immune from natural immunity. So what we need is another 1 million people to do the testing. Then you have 20 companies struggling to get in on the action to show that they have the best testing kit and the best vaccine for this. At the same time, they don't even know why they need it under other circumstances. Yes, the infections ran their courses, and on some, like polio and smallpox and others, the vaccines were very helpful. But this is way over the top. They're looking for the information that they should have had a long time ago, and it builds fear. And again, once more, a further attack on people able to get out and move around and not allow people to make their decision whether they can go to the beach or not.
Yeah.
This sort of thing. Oh, you might get too much sun. We wouldn't want you to have that. So this is, it compounds. So when they make a huge mistake about lockdown, ignoring the huge problems with the bursting of a financial bubble, then you have, all you do is create more and more problems. And then when they decide, well, maybe we're going to move out away from lockdown. We're going to open up the doors a little bit. But to do that, what do they have to do? They have to decide who gets their freedom back first and what part of their freedom they get. I thought freedom was natural to us. We should have our freedom. But if you are a problem in society and you're spreading terrible diseases and causing harm, that's a different story. But this whole idea of this presumptiveness that we have to find out everybody who had it, everybody now who might get it, and we have to control you now, and we have to have biological ID to show that it's an excuse. By the time they get that biological D and the immunization ready, the vaccine, this one will be gone by. But we've already read stories about that may be the case, but there'll be another one. And we need more control of the people so that we don't allow this to happen again. Well, I know one control that would work. Reduce the number of politicians and bureaucrats that we have in Washington about 90%, and that would be it. And you wouldn't have so much mischief. And if somebody wants to go and write a non-academic article, let somebody else, deal with it. But right now, the fake media.
Yeah.
Mr. President, it's fake media. That's who's doing this stuff.
Yeah.
And they spread it around. But the fact that it covered the whole world is pretty amazing. That to me is pretty scary on how it became universal. And because it's a serious problem and they can play on that. But when you think of it, you can find the statistics that sort of support our position in that people shouldn't have panicked. They should have logically dealt with it, but people don't people don't get much credit, and sometimes they don't deserve it, that they will act in a logical manner because they become dependent on the government. If the government scares you and there's a monster out there, we got to go after him. And if Saddam Hussein is getting ready to drop a nuclear bomb on New York, we better go to war and kill millions of people.
Yeah.
So it's a psychological thing, and it's a propaganda, and they're very successful at it. I'd like to change it a little.
Yeah, let's hope. The thing that's amazing, we talk about the Neil Ferguson, but also the shifting rationale for keeping people locked in their house. First, the first thing was, we got to flatten the curve. If everyone hits the hospital at once, it's going to overload the system, people are going to die. It didn't change the overall amount of people that would die, but it didn't let the hospitals get overwhelmed. So we were told. The hospitals will never close. A couple of them were pretty heavy, but most of them laid off people. So the flatten the curve was the first rationale. That's gone. No one's even talking about that anymore. And then it shifted to no more coronavirus patients, full stop. Well, that's never going to happen. It's impossible. And then they said, oh, we got to wait till there's a vaccine. We were talking before, I'd read that there's never been a vaccine for any of the coronaviruses. Is that right? I mean, we've never had one.
No, there was never a great need to. It's a variation of the cold virus. But
then the new rationale, here's Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, who I think might be insane. Let's have this next picture up. Her rationale is just to be mean. For those of you who made plans for June, July, and August and want to see them, stay home. You know, I mean, this is madness.
Her glory day.
Her glory day, I know. And let's look at a couple of things. There are a lot of protests going on to Dr. Paul. I mean, in fact, it exploded over the weekend. Let's take a couple of quick pictures. I think this was Pennsylvania. This is a lot of people out there. Look at the next one. This is Idaho. Church is not essential 2020. Governor Little not essential 2022. I like that one. That's a good one. And here's New Hampshire too. Give me liberty or give me death. And Dr. Paul, I asked people to send some in. I have been so swamped with these wonderful pictures. I wish we could show more of them, but we can't. But you know what happened? People were organizing these protests to express themselves politically. But something really strange happened over the weekend. The head of Facebook, Zuckerberg, he was interviewed by Stephanopoulos. Let's look at that next slide. Look what he said. Facebook protests are misinformation, and Facebook will ban the organizers. So that's what they're doing, and that's why you don't see any of the organization of these peaceful protests. This is the chilling part, though, Dr. Paul. Listen to this. He was asked by Stephanopoulos about this, and he said, we classify that as harmful misinformation, and we take it down. And a Facebook spokesman confirmed to CNN that planned protests in California, New Jersey, and Nebraska were having their pages removed from Facebook at the request of state authorities. So this is not Facebook saying, hey, we don't want this on our page. This is the state calling Facebook and saying, we're feeling the heat from these people in the streets telling us they want to not be locked down. You better get these people off of Facebook. And Facebook says, okay, we'll do that.
That's why it's so important for people to realize the social media is an arm of the government, their existence and their participation, and they spy for the government. And it's a little bit confusing for some because they're supposed to be private companies that are allowed to express their opinion like we do. We express our opinion and report what we hear about and see. And yet here we're people that are the editors. They're the censors, and they do it. We've had it happen to us, and they just exclude it from the record, and they say, "Oh, this is just part of a libertarian society. Yeah. We have a right to do this." But under these circumstances, this strict control of speech and meetings and organizations is something that is being clamped down on by the government, and then you're getting help from people like Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
But there's one other thing that has bothered me about this whole thing is about the way they report deaths, and we've talked about this. We know that if somebody has 4 diseases, and it happens to be that they were exposed to coronavirus, that was the cause of death. And even now, of course, after that New York incident, thousands were reported secondarily and say they weren't even tested. But we're going to list it because it sounded like they could have had that. And that's supposed to be that. But the big thing is there's doctors involved in this. And I keep thinking of the ethics of this. They are signing these things. And you do hear a couple stories that doctors are saying, hey, sort of had a light bulb go, well, why are we doing this? Why do they come in here? But then again, medicine isn't free market medicine. Medicine depends mostly on government financing. You get your grants, your researchers, and you pay all the bills, and we have Obamacare, and we have Republican medical care, and the drug program. So government is very much involved. So you can't argue with that gigantic bureaucracy. But I think that's a real shame because there's a lot of doctors that have participated in that, and they ought to they ought to be more cautious. But I wonder if anybody will ever go back at least and look at this stuff. But right now, it's not going to happen. Nobody's going to come out next week and have a real poll because it'll be private information. That information is only for the benefit of the government to manage health care.
Yeah.
But you can't do this, so you're not allowed to look at the records.
Yeah. Well, I'll just close with a couple things, Dr. Paul. I noticed something very peculiar over the weekend with regard to Texas. I've been watching the numbers very close in Texas because it hits kind of close to home. Things are shut down here in Lake Jackson that should not be shut down. The state is shut down. Governor Abbott is dragging his heels on opening the state. Well, the Worldometer, this is the University of Washington model that estimates the number of deaths. They do it for each state. I've been watching Texas very closely. And it was right about 2,000, and then it jumped up to 2,700 would die through the course of this disease through August. And that was earlier in the weekend. All of a sudden, I looked on Saturday, that 2,700 would die just magically went down to 900. So 66%, they were off by 66%. Now they're saying only 900 would die. A radical shift down, and there's no explanation. Like, what caused that to happen? A, and B, Governor Abbott, take a look at this. Take a look at what's happening. And the last thing I'll have to say, Dr. Paul, is something unfortunate. I hate to end on a sour note, but we've had to cancel our Houston conference in May. We were hoping against all hope that in the end some kind of reprieve would happen and we'd be able to hold it. But unfortunately, Governor Abbott and Harris County Judge Lina Hidalgo have decided that we can't have any commerce in Houston, even though it's not very badly hit by anything. So we've had to cancel the conference, ironically, on free speech. I've sent out an email. Every person who's purchased a ticket will have a refund. And we hope to see you at the next conference if they allow us to have one again. So we are extremely disappointed. We've worked very hard to put together a good event. We'll keep working hard, and we'll try to do another one. We'll put together another good one, and we look forward to seeing you then. Dr. Paul?
Very good. I want to mention something that I don't think we mentioned today, but that has to do with the immunity systems that we have. And you can get immunity in a very natural way, which is probably 99% of our immunity, but it's getting worse because we have a systematic attack on this, and it's been happening, and we have to use everything artificial. We have to have vaccines. We give our kids, before they get out of the hospital, immunizations, and they want more and more, and it's a lot to do with what's going on now. Get another vaccine and force everybody to have it, force everybody to have a test. But there's more than people now starting to think about natural immunity, and I think we should give Lou Rockwell some credit for, with his reporting. Several people report on there quite frequently about natural immunity and what can do it, even with just changing a diet that's available to everybody and exercise. I'm an exercise freak. And I always say, I feel better. Well, now it's starting to see that they can even identify what goes on in our bodies when we feel better, and we get better immunity, sunlight and vitamins and all these things. So I just hope there's an explosion of interest in this. If you want to compete with the government, it doesn't mean the government isn't wrong all the time, just 95% of the time or so. But and you don't need to trouble to tell the truth. Most Americans don't believe the government, except they're scaring them to death about some monster going to attack us with a nuclear bomb, or that there's a virus out there that's going to attack everybody and kill millions of people. They have to be panicked into this. So I think people should have a greater interest, and there's a lot on the internet, and there's a lot of material out there. When I was in medical school, there was never any of it. It was always, government involvement, immunities, and, vaccinations. So let's hope this is a positive and we move in that direction, because even if the government doesn't want to give up, and even though they want to do more testing and more vaccines, they're totally inefficient. They can't do it. They can't accomplish it. And when they start jabbing needles and everybody and saying that we're putting a detector in there to follow everything you do in your health matters, tell you what, if people are rebelling against now being forced to stay in their house for a week or two, wait till that happens. I think we'll have more people waking up and say enough is enough. Well, let's return to a concept where we have trust and faith and an understanding of what a free society is all about. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.